the three of you are a real powerhouse. I've seen you in operation and been on the good receiving end of your talents as an interviewee. Now it's my pleasure to interview you for, the audience that I've got. But in all seriousness, I'm so interested, not just in this project, but in this trio that's come together to make this. And I think you all are going to go on and do other things together. Hi, this is Frank Schaeffer, and you are listening to and/or watching my podcast, In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. And that is also live on Facebook, or can be watched on Facebook or YouTube or many other places, all the places good podcasts are found to be listened to when this goes out as a podcast. And today I am in conversation with three people who are real friends of mine. They've come up to my part of the world in Massachusetts and visited with me. They're making an incredible film that I'm privileged to be a little part of. They interviewed me about it. And that is Nicole Brown, Ryan Gendel, and Austin, who is here with me, Austin Quarles. Am I saying it right?
Yep, that is correct.
Yeah, because it's always first names with you guys, and everybody else, I can say Gentle and Brown, I've got that one. But we could change it. Do they ever mock you for this, Austin, and say Austin Quarrelsome?
I've definitely never been afraid to shy away from a fight. So
all right, because there's a bunch of things you can do with Quarles. Brown is harder to mess with, and Gentle, yeah, well, but that would go in a sort of a nice way. Or someone could say, Ryan, you're not so gentle.
That was my brother's nickname in high school.
Yeah, okay, not so gentle. And then Quarles goes to Quarrelsome, or anyway, enough of that nonsense. These three people are terribly interesting people. They do wonderful things, which we're going to talk about, all that personal stuff. But what brought me into their life is a documentary project they're working on Reverend James Lawson, who is one of the lesser known civil rights leaders, but very much in the era of Dr. Martin Luther King. And we're going to talk about him. We're going to talk about the project. You need to be informed about who Reverend James Lawson is and why this film is being made and how it's coming along. So first of all, before we start all that, I don't want to assume anything. Nicole, you are, right now, you're doing something amazing in the medical profession. Just take 2 minutes and tell me what you were telling me before we went live here, because I'm just fascinated with what you're doing outside of the film project that you're producing.
Oh, thank you so much, Frank. Thank you for having us. And I am here live in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I work in healthcare now. I started the new year with healthcare. So I'm the manager of community benefits and diversity here at CHI Memorial. And so I was just sharing with Frank a few minutes ago. He's like, what have you been working on? Well, I'm excited to tell you that I'm on the implementation team for the Morehouse School of Medicine Common Spirit Health partnership. It's a $100 million partnership over the next 10 years. And serving on the implementation team has been a true blessing to me and an honor, because these students are coming to our doors. We are the first market in the partnership to have the students, and they're coming through our doors to work with our patients in the emergency department in neurology. And, just think about what their careers would take them in the next 10, 20 years. And then if you could rewind 20, 40, 50 years ago, when healthcare and equity and inclusion was just not a topic. So it's been an honor for me to be here. And that's just one part of the thing that I'd like to share about my role here. It's been a blessing.
Yeah, and the deficit between the healthcare that white Americans get in all classes of white society, privileged or not so privileged, and that Black people get, especially women, and infant mortality rates and prenatal care and so forth, is still huge. So the fact that you're involved with Morehouse, I think, also has a huge impact socially beyond simply the medical issues. I mean, talk about that a little bit, because it's not a field that I know a lot about, but I know enough to know that it's a real concern and needs to be discussed.
Oh yeah, so I could briefly just share like some small stats when you think about the 2019 Hamilton County Report on Health. And for African Americans, we were in the 30% likely to die. When you think about stroke, when you think about heart disease, when you think about a number of the social determinants of health, that impacts someone that looks just like me.
Mm.
That's my parents, and my dad had a stroke, so I know exactly, and he's no longer with us. I know exactly what the stats mean, and we have to do more advocacy when you think about access to healthcare education. For healthcare, there is a major trust barrier with African Americans and health systems because of the Tuskegee experiment, Henrietta Lacks, and which, by the way, she helped with a lot of research that's happening today, even the COVID-19 vaccine. So when you think about the charge that we have to do in healthcare, more particularly protecting marginalized populations, we have work to do daily. I wouldn't call this a weekday type job. It's 7 day a week to advocate for minorities in health.
You know, before we move on to Ryan and Austin, one other thing I wanted to ask you, Nicole. I know we chatted a little bit when you were up here interviewing me for your documentary about your own background and your own journey from, you know, birth through childhood to what you're doing now. And I think it was a very fascinating kind of moving story. You've done some interesting things, but you've also had a lot of experiences as a woman, as a Black woman, as someone who's done some living, but at the same time has, I guess, survived a lot of things in some ways. And I just wanted to, I don't want to get too personal too quickly. I like to sucker you in a little bit in these discussions and talk about other things and then find out, you know, get to the bottom line. But let's just take a minute and talk about you, Nicole, because you've struck me as a wonderful kind of person. I just want folks to know you a little better.
So my career started in radio as a radio personality. How did I get there? I was an intern. And at graduation, my undergraduate graduation, the radio station called and offered me a job on air. Didn't think that would happen so fast, but it did. So I worked in the media for 15 years. And along the way, I also helped start a couple of radio stations, commercial radio stations that are still on today. So I'm proud to be a part of that. And then I went on to create a radio station for students at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, where I worked there for 25 years. I was also adjunct faculty. I helped create the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the university. I worked in human resources. I did a number of things there. And then I became a caretaker in 2019. My dad had a stroke, and me and my mom and my sister, we had to do something very different, very challenging in our life. And so I didn't like what I saw, what we were experiencing in healthcare. So I'm not a person to talk negatively about a situation. I wanted to go and help. And so once my 25 years popped up, didn't know it's going to happen like that. A board member here at CHI Memorial said, you need to be in this job. And I fussed with the Lord. I said, not right now. I want to wait. I like what I'm doing. And so voila, I'm here and being able to really impact my community. I've been in the community since I was an undergrad, but this is definitely boots on ground, a different style of community, but it's helping people and particularly with their health, because health is wealth. And
Yeah.
I'll just close on that. I'm really enjoying my life right now. It's very rewarding.
Yeah. So anyway, that's a great thumbnail, but you know, the very important things you've done. You're not a trivial person. It seems everything you touch is of great import, including this documentary on Reverend James Lawson. You know, you seem to zero in on the heart of the matter whenever you get into it. So now let me get to Ryan and Austin a little bit. Guys, take whatever time you want. Tell us a little bit about this project on Reverend Lawson. I guess the best thing to do is to decide which of the two of you or both of you will tell me a little bit about who he is, because I've got to be honest with you, until you contacted me to talk about the kind of white evangelical aspect of American culture that I do know something about in the context of race relations, racism, the new evangelical white nationalism, and so on, all of which has a lot to do with Reverend James indirectly, because this is the context of all this struggle, and it's gotten worse in some ways. I really didn't know much about him. So tell us about Reverend James Lawson and tell us about this project, but let's learn about the man first. And all three of you chime in anytime you want, but we have to let Ryan and Austin say something here.
We will give the floor to Nicole at any point that she wants it. We are honored to work with her. She's an incredible person and a steward for our community. So we are we're honored at all points to even be on this call with her.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Unfortunately, I agree with you completely, Frank. When this project was brought up by me, not by me, I did not create this project, but when I was told about, who, he was as a person, who the Reverend was, I had no idea. I'd never heard of him. And I hate to say that, but it's so true. So many people that we've talked to have said the same thing, like, oh, who is that? Reverend Lawson is such a pivotal part of what we've now no longer called, the civil rights movements. From doing this project, we say the movements wherever they were. So, you have the Nashville movement, Mississippi movement, whatever movement it was. His hands were there. He, created and trained the individuals who did the sit-ins, the students here in Nashville, which was the first major city in the South to be integrated.
Yeah, he came by the request of Martin Luther King.
And give me a date, not a date and time and place. I mean, this isn't a history lesson, but tell me when Reverend Lawson was born, if you remember with that.
I think
he was born September 22nd, 1928.
Yeah.
19 what?
28.
28. Okay. So when was he doing this action that you just mentioned, this first action at the behest of Martin Luther King Jr.? What years?
Well, there's definitely a history that was skipped with my statement there. So he actually started with when he went to
India.
Let's go back a little bit there to where he went to prison.
This was, I think, the Korean War, and he ended up being drafted, and a lot of people call him a conscientious objector because that's what the media kind of labeled these people as. And he's always had a gentle correction of saying, no, I did that because I was a Jesus follower, and the Jesus I believe in could not reconcile war and all of this violence with his belief. So he went to jail for that. And then I think he served for over a year. And his church at the time they let him get out by doing a mission trip to India. And that's when he ended up meeting Gandhi and working under him and learning a lot of the nonviolence principles and everything that he then brought back to the States. And he went to Oberlin at the time in Ohio, and Martin Luther King came to speak. And that's when they actually had a first introduction. And Martin Luther King was like, taken aback immediately, knowing this guy's not just talking about it, he lives it. This is a part of who he is. So he said, we need you in the South now. And that's just, I think within a year or so, maybe less than that, he moved to Nashville. And that's when he enrolled at Vanderbilt. And I think he was the first graduate student, and then maybe one of the first, one of two African-American students at Vanderbilt at the time. And so he got there, I think in 59 is when they started officially doing the training for these sit-ins. The movement started in 1960, but they always kept saying this started way before then. The media just heard
the sit-ins were related to what?
The segregated lunch counters.
Yeah,
so,
I was assuming that, but I wanted you to say it because my ignorance is vast on this subject.
Yeah, so it actually, I mean, obviously, if you look at it, with what they did, it was about, having access to these lunch counters and stuff, but there was obviously a much bigger issue, which was segregation as a whole in the South. And so they, when we say they, we mean the students, mostly from Fisk and Meharry, the traditionally African-American schools here in Nashville, came together with the leadership of Reverend Lawson and said, any movement is good movement, and let's chip away to, at this block of, that's standing in our way. And so the first thing that they thought was, hey, let's do these sit-ins at the lunch counters. Let's see if we can be treated as a normal human who wants food.
Yeah, well, I mean, even
go ahead.
Before that, one of the principles they learned from Gandhi is to really study the setting first before you take action. And so they got a group of people that were just not even the students, but just everyday people that were part of the church congregations and everything. And they were a group of Black women that basically said, we can't go downtown because if we touch a piece of clothing, we have to buy it, whether it's the right size or not. And then, at that point, then we also can't go get a meal with our kids. They can't use the restroom there. So there's all these things that the lunch counter was the first thing they could chip away at. but it was so much a bigger picture leading up to it. So that was
a symptom of a bigger illness.
Yeah, and that was the entry point where they figured, hey, we can start here and make this a kind of a physical demonstration of racism at play.
And how much contact did Reverend Lawson have, besides Martin Luther King Jr., with the other activists of the era in the movement? Just give me a feeling again. Okay, so he met Gandhi, he knows Gandhi, he knows Martin Luther King Jr., who tells him to come to the South and work on this. Nicole, how involved was he with other leaders at that time, or did they find out more about him later? I'm just trying to figure it out. What was his place in the movement as a leader in the movement?
Yeah, so you can look at him as the strategist of the movement. He was the one at the table. It's important to be at the table. So he's at the table with Dr. King and others when you think about the civil rights movement, which he doesn't like to use that name, civil rights movement. Yeah. He references movements, but when you think about his impact on galvanizing the students, the name Diane Nash, the name Marion Barry, the name John Lewis, and what they were able to do post being his students, training, and you can also recognize the fact that not only did he work with the students, he worked with the other civil rights leaders and honed in the importance of the training that he learned about from Gandhi and nonviolence. And when you think about what they were able to endure despite what they were trying to do, they stood the ground. They were steadfast, and they were not only mentors, but they also were able to show advocacy around the country when you are discussing about nonviolence and the lunch counters. And I just want to do a reference for me. You're looking at a kid who went to see my babysitter. She worked at Woolworth here in downtown Chattanooga. My mom took me and my sister, and all we wanted to do was to eat at the lunch counter where Miss Dungeon worked. But because of this whole era of just tragedy in our country, this Black woman who was my babysitter was too afraid to allow us to sit at the lunch counter. This is post the work of Reverend Lawson. But here I am as a kid, didn't understand what is this going, why can't I eat here? So you're looking at decades of tragedy for people of color, and then some when it comes to the work that Dr. Lawson started. So excuse my passion, but I'm that kid that couldn't eat at the counter. I think it was a sandwich or something, but we had to take it home.
When you first encountered the name Reverend James Lawson, Ryan, was it through Nicole? The three of you, talk amongst yourselves. Tell us the story of how you three came together around this subject. Who introduced to whom, when? Give me a sense of the film process itself as you have developed it. And then we're going to get back to Reverend Lawson and his life, and there's so much more to say, but I just want to talk with you. Before I do, I just want to remind people you're listening to a podcast called In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. I am Frank Schaeffer. This is live on Facebook. It is also recorded. And by the way, I want to say right here that links to Nicole and to Ryan and to Austin and their project and to material about them and this film they're making and Reverend Lawson, we'll be posting that everywhere this goes. So anybody who wants to get in touch with them or part of this somehow, you will find it easy to do so. We will give you all the information. So again, Nicole Brown, Ryan Gentle, Austin, thank you. And now could you please tell us how you three happened to come together to make this? Who's doing what on the project? How did you first hear about each other or the issue of this vacuum in the general knowledge about leaders who changed so much of our country, Reverend Lawson being one of them? Why don't we know more about him? How did you all unite to do something about that?
Well, I'll start the conversation off because I'm probably the culprit here. I remember growing up and seeing the I am a man signs when people were marching throughout the South, and just being curious of why does that stick out so much? So just fast forward to watching the movie The Butler, and you're seeing this Reverend James Lawson depicted as training the students to do sit-ins. They were spat on, they had cigarette butts on them. And I'm just like, who is this man? Like, why don't I hear about him? Why haven't I heard about him in my books in school, the history books in school? Never saw his picture, never heard about him. And so I'll say this, I'll start it, Frank, with some scrambled eggs. I was in line at an event where he was speaking, his niece, they were hosting an event in, I think that was 2020. And I was in line to get scrambled eggs. But my colleague from the university at the time, he pulled me out of the line and said, you're up next to do the interview with Reverend James Lawson. And I'm like, I just wondered, what? What do you mean, what? So there was no prep, no nothing, but I did the interview with him. It was very pleasant, very knowledgeable, very sharing. Saw him speak at the event, and I was just compelled and interested of, I want to know more, but I don't want to know more for me. I want the world to know more about this gentle giant that's in our midst, and we don't see a statue of him. We don't see much about him. And so my colleague that pulled me out of line from the scrambled eggs took the package, my interview package, to Ryan. And I'll let Ryan tell his story when he saw who was on the editing clip.
Okay.
So
Ryan, tell us.
My grandparents, my mother's side of the family, going back generations, is from Nashville. So we've been involved in several historic moments of Nashville's history. And my grandparents were involved in one way or another throughout several times in the civil rights movement in Nashville. And they also had lifelong friends who, I didn't find out about this until after they passed away, but they had barely escaped Nazi Germany by a year or two. And they moved to Boston at first. And then I don't know exactly what the timeline was, but they moved to Nashville around the time when the sit-ins started. It may have been just a few years before that. And so they saw the students that would come in, and they saw the white mobs that would lash out to them and everything. So what they did is actually use themselves as a shield to stand behind the students, put their hands on their shoulders and say, thank you, we support you, keep doing what you're doing. So we have known of the name James Lawson, John Lewis. We've talked about these things. My grandmother actually taught at Vanderbilt for a while too. So I've known about that name, and I've been reading a book called The Children that really gives all the backstory of all these people. So I've known of the name for years. And as soon as I got the video, the footage from Nicole and Mike, my boss at the time, I was like, I saw the name and I was like, dibs, I'm editing that. There's no one else that's going to touch the project. That's something that's vitally important to me. And so that's how I got involved. And then Boston, Europe.
So I was lucky enough, just by proxy of knowing these two individuals, Nicole, which we met when we were both students at UTC. And then
tell us what ETC is. We don't all know what that means.
Yeah, UTC, the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga.
Okay, good.
Which we are all proudly connected with at some point in our lives. But when Ryan was asked to do this project, or I guess, bullied himself into working on this edit, I was lucky enough just to be, a part of that, to help edit, to help see it through. And from that came a short clip that was really moving, very powerful, showed just incredible imagery, and to my knowledge, then went to James Lawson himself and his family, who ended up seeing it and were moved by it as well.
And is this 2020?
This was 2019.
2020.
2020?
Yeah, the interviews in February.
So just parenthetically, you also picked the moment in history when everybody has to sit at home for a year.
Yeah.
Good work there. Good work, guys. When it's the hardest time in the last 50 years to make a movie, we'll do it that year.
Yeah. Exactly. But we did find people at a very introspective time, where people were really, a lot of struggle, a lot of protesting still going on, and it was very much at the forefront.
Let me just quickly ask a question, which is going to come to people's minds. Have you already interviewed Reverend Lawson on camera? I know you've interviewed me. Have you interviewed him? Do you have that material in the can, as we used to say when we used film instead of all this high-tech stuff that I don't understand?
No.
Have you done the interviews?
Nicole, I'll let you answer that one.
So that we're working on that. We are in a pandemic, and being respectful of vaccines, and then some, just being respectful of Reverend Lawson's personal time, we are in communication about scheduling time to go out to actually interview him. I sat down with, several minutes and have him on camera as well. But thanks to his niece, who they have a lunch counter in their business, Davis Wayne's, Cynthia is my direct contact, and she's the one who allowed me to go to her home to sit down with Reverend Lawson for 5 hours? It was like 1 o'clock in the morning. And that was not on film, but that was like a one-on-one conversation that really led to my more curiosity of having a more broader production about him. But we are in the works of making that happen. I do want to say that we've interviewed one of his very close friends, Reverend Paul McDaniel, and your audience may not know who that is, but if you have a minister that is serving in any public office right now, they owe Reverend Paul McDaniel. He's the one that won his court case with the U.S. Supreme Court to allow ministers to run for office. Sadly, Reverend McDaniel passed in August, and he was really one of the good friends of Reverend Lawson. And so as you think about this project, as you think about the senior citizens who are participating in this project, we don't have a lot of time on our side, but we are doing everything we can to get those interviews on tape, and so that we can work on the editing. I hope that answers your question, Frank.
Yeah, so I'm hoping you get to him. When do you think you might be interviewing him on camera?
So hopefully in a couple of months. You have to think about, he's having some personal matters to tend to that are heavy priority. They're family related, and we don't want to interrupt that. But once that is over, I've been in communication constantly with his niece, Cynthia, who lives here in the area. Then that's when we will try to schedule, a more solid date. Yeah, and then, we really are being respectful.
I think I've seen something through you guys earlier, clips that you showed me of him in action. There is some historical footage of him out there. I forget whether he was preaching. What's he doing in the footage available to you that's in some archive somewhere, a news archive or whatever it might be?
How can I add this before Ryan responds to because
yes.
he gathers the archive footage? Reverend Lawson came to Nashville, Tennessee during the pandemic a couple of months ago, and he actually walked a mile as a dedication for the John Lewis named the street name. And so yes. There's also footage out there, current footage out there. But for him to walk without a cane at this age, he is still in the fight. So Ryan, I didn't want to take your shine there, but just wanted to say, there's also current footage of him in action.
Oh, that's great. So there are things out there that you're going to be able to use to make your case for him. And then in terms of the film itself, have you got someone who has studied, I guess, the entirety of the civil rights movement from a point of view of expertise, who obviously would know who he is and his connection with Lewis and others? Who all besides me are you interviewing? And obviously Reverend Lawson himself. And then you're bringing other voices in, aren't you?
Bringing other voices in, including one of the students that he trained, who was roommates with Diane Nash. We interviewed her. We don't want to give all the secrets out. Come on now, you know how this works. Promoted the book. Fall in love. What is it, children?
No, hey, you know what? This is not about me. I just
don't want to give out all the secrets, but we have interviewed Miss Baker, who was one of the students. Like I said, the roommate of Diane Nash. She had a very compelling story. She was in New York. Was in New York. She is in New York, and we interviewed her. Brian, you want to share one more? Because I mentioned Reverend McDaniel.
I would say one of the more fascinating and pertinent people that we interviewed was Dr. Dickerson, who's the professor of the James Lawson.
He's the James Lawson Chair Historian
for Vanderbilt University. Yeah. So he is both a dear friend of Reverend Lawson, but also a fantastically amazing source for all things Reverend Lawson. And we got to sit down with him.
So there is a chair at the university named for Reverend Lawson.
Yes.
That's great.
Yeah.
And go ahead, Austin.
I was just going to share that Reverend Lawson, since his he has an interesting history with the University of Vanderbilt University, where he was, kicked out of the divinity school for his work in the movement in Nashville. But obviously since then has created a very beautiful relationship with the university, where he actually donated all of his archives, his records, photos, they all belong at Vanderbilt now to be shared with the students and anyone who's interested in seeing that information.
Yeah.
Did he ever intersect with some of the folks that I know that Martin Luther King Jr. intersected with in one way or another on the cultural side of the movement, thinking of some of the music and the other things that were going on with, Nina Simone or whomever it might be? I'm just wondering what all the threads are that came together, because it's always interesting to me how some of these leaders moved people, to write songs and to write books and to do other things. I wonder who all he met along the path there, because so many paths intersected in the movement that he was part of.
Yeah, he go ahead. Well, can I just make one statement?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
About the interview question, Frank, you would probably list us as the first group to be able to go directly to the family. So we have interviewed a couple of members of the family. So it's very important that when you have such a high caliber leader in our country, and we see them as one way, but how is the man at home with his wife, with his children, so we have that aspect with our project. And we haven't mentioned the name of our project, but it's called The Outside Agitator, the story of Reverend James Lawson. So I wanted to make sure that we share that with all of your viewers and your listeners here.
Well, and I hope you don't change the title, but we'll put it, Ernie, my wonderful producer and friend, who makes everything possible that I do on this program, by the way, will list the name. So repeat it, and then we'll put that up.
Yes, it's called The Outside Agitator, the story of Reverend James Lawson. And I do want to also mention that the University of Delaware had a summit over this past summer, and they used the clip that you all saw, how this whole project got started. They used some of our clip to kind of kick off their summit. And so I was just in awe that we really haven't finished a lot at that time, but for somebody to recognize the quality of our work and the work of Reverend James Lawson and wanted to use that to kick off the conversation, that was a blessing for us.
Yeah. So now let me talk about your roles in this. Titles don't mean much: producer, director, writer, and so forth to folks. But are you sharing? Is there a director? Who's the director?
We're all co-directing it.
Yeah, you're looking at us.
Yeah, we all just looked at each other, and we were there at the first conversations of, hey, how do we make this work? And that's pretty much stuck. Nicole is the executive producer since the whole interview even started from her, and she's gotten us in conversations with people that at the time it seemed like we had no business talking to, but just to get a seat at the table to talk to producers of other projects and all these other things. And so that's pretty much it. We're co-directing, we're producing, and Nicole's an executive producer.
We've been told we're crazy for having 3 directors.
Who of the 3 of you? I know, Nicole, you have a history in radio and the media. Ryan, talk a little bit about your background in terms of, getting behind a camera, making stuff. Obviously somebody in the 3 of you knows what you're doing. And I say that only because I saw the footage of the clip that you made of me. And I told Ernie afterwards, I said, wow, Nicole, I've been interviewed by tons of people over the years as an author. And Nicole, your interview with me, produced some of the best stuff I've ever done. I mean, you have a real knack. You're going to get pearls out of people because it was terrific. And then the look of the film clip that you very kindly gifted us with so that I could use it to promote my new book and talk about it, which we have used and we put up everywhere and we can reference when we run this podcast out there. It was gorgeous. It looked like a scene out of a feature film. And I told Ernie, I said, wow, if only I could be so lucky to be lit and filmed and interviewed this well by everybody. So this bodes really well. So I guess the way I'm putting this delicately is somebody amongst you knows what they're doing. Who is it?
It's all of us. And thank you for the compliment, Frank. But I do want to say it's all of us. Yes, I have a background in media, but I also have experience in doing documentary projects where my first one was a collaboration with the Tennessee Human Rights Commission. And that led me to, I was doing the interviews, how I interview you, Frank.
Yeah.
So I did these interviews and I was just thinking they're trying to cut this down to a 5-minute clip? No way. So that's when I just started to say, we're going to do a documentary. And so my colleague who was Ryan's supervisor, he's like, "Here you go, oh Lord."
Yeah.
I'm like,
Oh,
"Yes,
Lord, right.
we're going there." And so that project was called 9 United for Equality Reflection on the struggle for civil rights in Chattanooga. And then another colleague, I saw him do some things when it comes to social justice, and he had a music composition. And I approached him. I was like, "Hey, let's collaborate and do a documentary." He's like, "Can you do something like that? Do you have a skill set?" And so fast forward, that film was a short film. It's called The 14th Amendment, All a Cryin. And so now we're doing this outside Agitator, the story of Reverend James Lawson. But Ryan and Austin, what they haven't told you yet is that they're award-winning filmmakers now. See, we haven't done that yet. So
hey, Ryan, tell us about that.
Them.
Tell us the award-winning. Nicole's bragging on you. So get up here and tell us what you've done.
So we are in the middle of a festival run with a short film that we did. It's called Galileo. It's a tribute to my dad in a lot of ways, but it's kind of like a love letter to science fiction and a father-son relationship, really a coming-age story, father-son relationship. And so that's taken off in festivals and everything a lot more than we expected it to when we started. But yeah, I mean, we work well off of each other in that. I love the technical parts of film, and we both write together, but Austin also kind of sees the bigger picture where I'll get caught up in like, oh, if I edit this right here, this 2 seconds in right here, or something like that, or I change this light, and then Austin's like, yeah, we can cut that.
It was a learned balance. Yeah, we've been doing this together. We were random college roommates at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, and both shared almost an infantile love of film. Since birth, we've both loved film. He, had the opportunity to make some of his own films when he was younger, and I've just studied film my whole life. So we almost immediately found that in common and have been plugging away at this for 11 years now, creating anything we can. We do the video work for Visit Chattanooga, which is part of the Tennessee Visitors Bureau, as well as the Chattanooga Visitors Bureau, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so I mean that really got us started on the at least technical aspects, and then Nicole actually used to be a professor of ours that we knew, and so our paths had always kind of crossed until.
What was Nicole teaching you?
Well, so Nicole, we didn't have a class with Nicole, but we did. So Nicole was in. Both of us were communication majors, so she was in that department, and then we met her through the radio station was called The Perch, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we met through that.
There's no one in Chattanooga is unaware of who Nicole is.
Stop it. So Frank, to answer your question, I taught audio production and presentation. I also taught the radio course, radio broadcasting, and I served as the advisor in the communications department at that time. Yeah. So I love production.
Well, listen, Nicole, I got this new book to launch, and this program's not about that, but you have contacts on the radio. Tell them to call me and interview me about my new book. I need help on this thing, getting the word out. And or any book club or anybody else. And I'm talking about, if it's one person plus your mother-in-law, that's a book club. I'll do it.
You do it. So I don't tell people, I kind of advocate for you, if that'll work for you.
Advocate for me.
I'll advocate for you, Frank, and tell them how you're very
because
pleasant.
I've got a crazy feeling that, if Nicole Brown's on your side, who can be against you?
Right. You're going to be on the New York Times bestseller list. Calm down.
I mean, I'm not begging or anything, Nicole. I'm just begging.
I understand. I'm actually helping a friend who's like a local celebrity. They have a book launch that's coming out in March, and I've already made some connections for this particular individual. And it's going to be a massive, big thing that's happening. And I'm thinking, what? Who's doing that for Nicole? Can Nicole Brown get some of that?
Like the biblical verse, when you come into your kingdom, remember me. Because I have a feeling, Nicole, you're going to you'll have a second half to your life is going to be running some vast something. And when you do, like say, a few crumbs on the table for this old guy that I interviewed once, throw me some pocket change, because you have such a powerful dynamic way of doing things. And you guys, Ryan, and Austin, the three of you are a real powerhouse. I've seen you in operation and been on the good receiving end of your talents as an interviewee. Now it's my pleasure to interview you for, the audience that I've got. But in all seriousness, I'm so interested not just in this project, but in this trio that's come together to make this. And I think you all are going to go on and do other things together. It's just my feeling that you have a really, I mean, when people get a good working relationship between an editor and a publisher and a writer, or between a filmmaker and a novelist, and, and then all of a sudden that can be very powerful. And I think, the three of you have got something going here.
Well,
I agree with you. You should hear the conversations though, Frank. It's three of us. I got two roommates and you got this Black woman. And yes. So when we have to dialogue and say, about editing and what works well. And I remember, wasn't you, Austin, said, so what you're saying is, I was like, oh, I'm trying to be a team player, but I am the one that speaks off the cuff and you know exactly how I feel. But that's just how strong this team is. Like, we respect the quality of our crafts. And so we can move forward. So, and I love our nicknames that we have, because we won't talk about nicknames. But yeah, we are a great team. I'm inspired by this team, the next generation for filmmaking. You're looking at Ryan and Austin.
Yeah, well, and Ryan and Austin, I've got books that should be made into movies, so don't forget me.
Yeah, well, you're forgetting we learned about you from Crazy for God, which we were absolutely stunned when we read the things that you had to say, and apropos to since you brought my life up, I just want to add one thing about Chattanooga, Tennessee. My dad used to speak all the time at Covenant College on Lookout Mountain. Mm-hmm. And as a teenager, this is way more, okay, sorry guys, but this is my podcast. I can do it. We're here for it.
I was along with my dad when I was 15 years old in Covenant College on Lookout Mountain, Tennessee, which is a hyper-evangelical, traditional conservative school. Okay. Yes. So he's got his teenage son with him. And then I came back years later as part of the evangelical religious right, spoke there myself as part of a conference, so forth and so on. But the memory that is green in my memory is that there was a nice young woman there who was very accommodating to me. And she was a student, probably 20 years old, and I was 15. I don't know if she thought I was a little older or she just sort of went for a little bit younger, but we wound up on the president of the college's couch in his living room while my dad was speaking in chapel preaching, and we were kissing, necking. We didn't do more than that, but it was a great college tour. I thought, hey, I want to go on all of these. Take me to Wheaton College, take me to Gordon Conwell, take me to Westmont. These Christian colleges are great. I just thought it was terrific. When you're 15 years old and a pretty girl who's a little older than you will, kiss you on the president of the college's couch, this is good. This is memorable. So it isn't exactly the image of the evangelical fundamentalist school that I think they wanted to project. And it wasn't what brought my dad there to speak at the college, but I'm 70 years old now and I'm still grateful. So I won't name her, but wherever you are, you remember this. And I just think it's this was really nice. Thank you very much.
You know what, Frank? I'm actually outside of my office here. I look at the whole cascade of Lookout Mountain and I'm just shaking my head at the mountain going, what did you do to Frank?
Yes. Well, put it this way. That's a hallowed space in my mind. I look out mountain, but not for the reasons you think. I didn't, it wasn't a spiritual experience, but it was a good one.
And they won't put that on the pamphlets.
That's right. So, I don't know where that couch is now, and I don't know where the president of the school is now, but I'll tell you what, it's okay. So that was back to the serious topic here. How are things going with the fundraising aspect of this project in terms of financing? Because these things are not cheap. How are you funding it? What are you doing? If people want to get involved and be part of this, what can they do? Talk to us a little. And remember, we're going to put links to everything. So how are you doing this?
Yeah, we're mostly self-funding, to be completely honest. We've been fortunate enough to do a lot of work and to have connections familially and just, within our communities that we've been able to pull together, a pretty good seed fund that we're using to do the basis of the film. And from that, we will expand to other ways of collecting and having people involved. We haven't offered any kind of public funding like GoFundMe or anything at this point. We're hoping to completely fund internally through, you know, organizations, companies,
Grants, if we
communities,
can.
grants.
They've been tricky, but
Yeah,
Have you shown the clip that you showed me, or maybe you have more now? Have you had any nibbles of the kind of distribution, you know, the people who put these things on TV? Is this going to be a 90-minute feature-length documentary?
somewhere around there, yeah. And Nicole actually got us in a meeting. I don't know if Nicole, if you want to share who that was with yet or anything, I'll let you decide on that. But we've had a few interests, not as far, we haven't had distribution talks yet, but there have been interest in the project. And we've got about the first 25 minutes of it edited that we've also been able to show people.
Oh, good.
And so that's where we're working with right now. I mean, I think we have at least 10 hours just of interviews alone, and then there's countless hours. I'm acting out also as the archival producer, and there's hours of footage of the actual students marching. There's a whole hour-long NBC episode called "The White Papers" of the whole sit-in movement. There's footage of James Lawson teaching the nonviolent workshops in Nashville at the churches before they went marching, and even warning them that police were going to be there that day. There's the footage from the clip that you saw of him speaking in Memphis. So yeah, I mean, that's what we're working with so far. So there's all kinds of stuff out there. We just have to figure out the right resources and who to talk to about that, and the being able to afford it.
And as
I would imagine the distribution will be something that will follow, because it's such a good subject, and you guys are so talented. My guess is it's just a question of showing it to the right people at the right time.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So we've been very fortunate to, I don't want to say the name, but with a film producer who met with us, was very gracious with us on sharing knowledge and providing avenues and suggestions.
Good.
And so that's when we kind of figured, oh, this is a really good project. Like, yeah, this is a team.
It also worked with Reverend Lawson too. So that was the thing too, where that was also good experience to know.
Ryan's out here trying to overshare, Nicole. We gotta.
I'm trying to like give you a look. You're not picking it up. Like, okay, cut that off.
But yeah, we've been very fortunate to be in rooms with some very amazing people, and even the names that have been mentioned. You're in for some surprises when this project is done, as of who we've spoken with, who we've sat down with, that are in those only 10 hours now, and that's only going to grow and grow. So it's
that's really great. It seems to me, that the battle that he was involved with also now continues in terms of the fallout from COVID, in that caregivers, women of color, women in general, and women of color in particular, and then caregiving women in childcare and care for elder people, have been hammered especially hard. And that's where it intersects with the project I've been working on, which is this whole idea of caregiving and being each other's caregivers being more important than career title in terms of how you prioritize your life. So there's a great intersection with the subject matter, but I want to talk a little bit with the three of you. And Nicole, if you want to share anything about that, because, the fight keeps changing, and who would have pictured that this kind of corporate culture that puts all its emphasis on shareholder profits has been so stingy to women and women of color, and also just this caregiving aspect. Because Nicole, you're a caregiver, you're involved in medicine and caregiving of people on a very direct level as well as on a personal level. And it just seems that COVID, we're living at a moment where the glaring inequity of the difference in pay scale, but worse than that, the respect the culture gives and doesn't give certain professions. It just seems ridiculous to me that we are so enamored with some startup in a garage that's going to go to Silicon Valley and make $1 billion, and you build your own rocket, and right under our noses are the women of color, all women in particular, who are the only link with our future, because it isn't just children, it's caregiving of elderly people and so on. It's very unequal. Men do not pull their weight. And when they try to, like Pete Buttigieg takes a little parental leave, then he gets mocked for doing what is a no-brainer that's good for kids. do you want to spend a little time, Nicole, talking about this? Because I think you'd bring something amazing to the table on it. You're a caregiver yourself, and you give your life to that. What's happening here, and how do we change it? And will COVID change it? Do we finally actually, like these words, essential worker, are we going to start treating people better?
I've been waiting on all people to be treated better for my lifetime, so I'm not sure if I'll see it in my lifetime. I'll be honest with that statement. But when you talk about caregiver, and when you think about the data hasn't changed, everybody knows where the minorities stand on all of the lists. But at the same time, you don't see action steps. You see, oh, we'll hire a diversity person, or we'll hire a community type person. But at the same time, until you change policy from a federal standpoint, I can march every day, all day. But do you hear me? Are you making a change at the table for minorities? Are you making a change at the table for women? Or are you just saying we're going to hire a position and then that will simmer down some of the fuss? Well, I'm here to say that that's not enough. We have to challenge policy from a federal standpoint and trickle it down to a state level, and don't let these other officials diminish what our efforts are. It has to be done. I would like to see that in my lifetime. I have a nephew that's a freshman in college. I would like to see that happen before he graduates from college, so that he can be proud of community efforts coming around to take care of women, minority women, Latino women, children, and then some.
And it strikes me as triply ironic that the whole rise of the religious right, that the litmus test was the abortion issue, and all yelling about, okay, you know, no abortions and contraceptives are suspect. This is the same group that bills anything that you do for women and children as socialism, including even paid parental paternity and maternity leave, which is directly in conflict with all their yelling and screaming about being pro-life. I don't think there's ever, put it this way, I think COVID has stripped away some things and the mask has fallen. So you used to be able to pretend better, but now the pretense is gone. If you're not for paid family leave, if you're not for higher wages for caregivers, you know, then please don't ever mention the word family values again to me.
Yeah, there's sorry.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Some of the things that you touched up on about the abortion movement, essential workers, all these other things, I think there's kind of a tectonic shift going on in some groups where the veil's been lifted and you can't just put it back on. I think there are some people that, you know, I don't know if it's a personal, they don't know how to manage the cognitive dissonance, or just want to pretend and just out of sight, out of mind. If I don't think about it, it'll go away. But I think there are a lot of people from COVID where the world literally was on pause. There's no football, there's no sports, there's no, you know, a lot of the stuff that distracted us all got stripped away. And a lot of the stuff we're seeing, there's even a movement out of the white evangelical churches where it's like, they're also seeing kind of what's behind the curtains a little bit too, where it's, you know, all these things that it was easy to sweep them under the rug beforehand. And then the thing about the essential workers too, one of the things that also drew us to Reverend Lawson is he was working on a sanitation strike for the sanitation workers in Memphis. And that's when he asked Martin Luther King to come after 2 workers were killed by a truck that went, there was a malfunction that ended up killing 2 of the workers. And that's where, to bring it back to what Nicole talked about the I am a man signs, those were created because of those sanitation workers, where they're demanding just to be treated like everyday people and just have dignity in their work. And sadly, not a lot has changed, but I think hopefully this is a point where people are seeing
suffering.
Yeah.
Lifting the veil and getting rid of the sports and stuff made people really see the suffer that is happening in this country and has been happening for decades.
Well, and it's so far past politics as we think of that word. You know, I picture a woman who's had a C-section working 2 or 3 jobs in a low-paid environment, going back to work before her stitches are out, and she's bleeding. What sort of a society does that? And we don't cut her any slack.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just basic humanity. And, you know, if you designed a culture that could claim to be anti-child, anti-woman, and anti-life. This would be it. And it's ironic to me that the people on the right who scream about family values are leading the charge in making sure that basic decency, like paid parental leave after a child is born, guarantees an income to a woman so she can at least please stop bleeding before she has to go work at McDonald's again. Give me a break.
Yeah.
It's a subject that I feel very passionate about. And I am really saddened that after all this work on the civil rights side of things, all this work by the feminist movement, you know, I'm like you, Nicole, you just wish that you could give a big sign and say, okay, that one was taken care of. Now we will move on. And I just don't think we're there on any front yet. So your film is so important because a movie about someone like Reverend Lawson is a window into not just all the issues he dealt with, but the entire inequality in this culture that keeps permeating each generation as we go forward. We have to change the system we're living in. I really believe that. Let me remind people that you've been watching In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. My guests today have been Nicole Brown, Ryan Gentle, and Austin Quarles, and they are making a film on Reverend James Lawson. Give me the title one more time, Nicole.
Yes, it is The Outside Agitator, the story of Reverend James Lawson.
Yes, and we're going to post the title and how people can connect with you everywhere. You can listen to this on podcast. You can rewatch it on YouTube. I have a new book out called Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy in, as they say, bookstores everywhere. Nice claim. I have no clue whether it's in one bookstore anywhere. I'm waiting for Nicole Brown to call her thousands of friends and insist that they book me on their radio shows, Nicole. And I really just can't tell you what a pleasure this has been. I met you three guys. I love each of you very much. I think you're wonderful people. I hope this is the beginning of a long friendship, not just interviewing me, but include me as a supporter. And if push comes to shove and you need something, you think I can help out in any way, I will be there for you. So thank you all very, very much for this time. It's really, really been a tremendous pleasure.
Thank you so much. I'm going to make that phone call and try to get your interview really quick. Okay.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And if you need something else for me to do with this project, or you're looking for some funding or something, and we can help promote that. If you do a public funding thing at some point, just count me in as a supporter who will help out.
Well, I really appreciate that. I also just wanted to say something that you just touched up on about where the things are in our society. I think you really hit the nail on the head that we have to change fundamentally where we're going. And I think I think the irony doesn't escape me that a lot of the opposition to these things are led by people who claim to follow someone who says what you do to the least of you is what you do to me, but deny the least of us at almost every opportunity. And I think that a lot of these systems people are raised in are the problems more so than the individual people. But those systems are so powerful that they make otherwise well-intending people do horrible or hurtful things because they've been given a bad blueprint with the best intentions.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we wanted to reach out to you in the first place after reading your book, because of just the sincerity and the honesty and just even when it wasn't pretty on your own end about things, but you were willing to make amends and to do better once you knew better. And I think we need that in this country more so than ever. And I think that's the other thing that we want to talk about the difference in the Christianity between the James Lawson and someone more in a white evangelical space. So again, thank you for your time and doing this and being willing to work with us.
It's really an honor to be involved and included in a project like this. Thank you. Again, thank you so much, everybody. See you at the next bend in the road, and much love to all three of you. You're great people. Thanks.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.